Okay. Thank you. I'll try to be quick. I know we arrived here just in time. So let's see. I usually start with a photograph of my family from the 1940s, just to ground myself wherever I am, whatever institution, city, or state. What I'm going to really focus on is a lot of formal things in my practice. It has a lot to do with art residencies, sustainability, perseverance, and resourcefulness. I'm sure some folks here are grad students, maybe some undergrads, maybe first years, second years. And what came to mind to me when I was a grad student was, how am I going to sustain myself afterwards? I was living in my studio at the time in grad school to avoid taking out loans. Took out enough loans for grad school, so and then what do I do afterwards? How do I sustain myself? I did art residencies for 10 years right after graduating, back to back, to avoid a full-time job, to avoid renting an apartment, and to avoid just conforming and in every way you can think of. I needed to just practice my studio work. So I transitioned from grad school directly into a residency in upstate New York called Art My. From there, I went to Studio Museum in Harlem for a year, and then Lower Manhattan Cultural Council for 9 months. The core program in Houston for 2 years. While I was there, I did short stints at Center for Photography, Three Walls, Artpace, Louisiana Artworks in New Orleans, MacDowell Artist Colony, Henry Street Settlement, and Headlands. Anyway, I can keep going, but my point is I try to avoid getting a full-time job and just stopping my practice. The only thing I wanted to do is survive initially. But during the process, I also realized that the residency programs were helping my practice. They were networking my work without my awareness. And then, of course, I was fully aware of it. Some residencies are more retreats, others are for networking, and some are for both. Some will pay you, some won't. Most you can squat in and find a corner to sleep on. But that all depends on your ambitions and what you're willing to do. I don't want to say sacrifice, because for me it wasn't a sacrifice, because there was no alternative. So most of what I'll show you is work that I did during these residencies. And I wanted to open it up to just anyone have a conversation with me or amongst each other. Very informal. Just ask away. Let's not wait until the end. And I'll show you a little bit of what I started with, because in junior college, let's see. Before junior college, actually. My beginning was magic realism, comic books, fiction, to cope with the daily violence. I was growing up in South Florida, Miami. These are some of the comic books that I photographed that I saved. I made thousands of comic books between age 12 and age 17, all of which I destroyed because they weren't for anybody to see other than myself. I got into a lot of graphic design, using commercial tools to express what was going on in my neighborhood, in the city at the time. I didn't take any classes in high school because they weren't offered. They didn't have any visual art classes or anything like that. Or if they did, they were always full. So I just developed on my own. Other than that, I was writing on walls. I always had these sayings: Don't Kill You're Ambitious, or Fast Forget Tupanos, things like that. Tupac in reference to Tupac Amaru, which I'll elaborate later. And so it took me about 6 years to go from undergrad, well, from junior college, because I didn't know what I was doing. My GPA was about 0.94. And at Miami-Dade Community College, I didn't have a very good high school record. But I wanted to go to school, but I wasn't sure for what. And family sometimes pushes you away from taking anything that's creative, because they don't see a dollar sign behind it. But after about 3 years, I decided to take art classes. And my GPA changed, my whole attitude changed after that. The reason I didn't do it is because of family, but I also just didn't know anything about contemporary art. To me, art was Salvador Dali and Picasso, and that's it. That's all I knew. So, but I didn't know how to paint. I knew how to draw, those kind of things. I got through and transferred to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and did a lot of performance work, mostly drawing. Didn't have a lot of money for materials, so I used postcards and office supplies. And this is an example of a postcard, 4x6 postcard. I used a typing machine, typewriter. So this is actually tiny. This is another postcard. This is the work that I was doing in undergrad. And some of it comes back through self-reflection. Then we're going to jump to grad school. So I did a lot of those postcards to get through undergrad. They were presented as grids, large-scale grids. But when I got to grad school, I took out loans for school, for classes. But by that point, I already started also accumulating a certain visual vocabulary that I was still developing a bit, that drew more from the economy of materials as part of my content. And so this is about 5 by 9 feet. It's gold leaf, but it's not real gold leaf. It's fake gold leaf, but also spray paint on backdrop paper. I would go and raid the theater department garbage for used backdrop papers, because I didn't have enough money to go and buy Arches papers or anything like that. So I mostly used that. The gold leaf was inexpensive because it was fake. And the rest is just watercolor and pencils. And most of my work addresses, well, like Sadie said, certain geometries, encoding, cultural encoding, history, intersections between different cultures as well, and kind of illuminating our commonalities that we may not be aware of. This is another 5 by 9 foot collage. Those are just magazine pages that are cut out and cut into through a shredder. The paper is not always perfect, but that's part of the work also. This is actually my thesis exhibition. A lot of the work is salon style. I usually incorporate photography, drawings, sketches, printouts. They're all interrelated. This is titled Machu Picchu After Dark. Oh. Okay. And it's a combination of 2 different narratives, Afro-Peruvian drums called cajon, and Andean architecture. And it's about 17 feet high. It's a solid piece of speakers that I acquired in South Florida for about a year. And then I drove them up to grad school. The back side of the piece is this part. So it's also a shrine. Now this is work done at Studio Museum in Harlem. in a span of a year. It's called Band of Gypsies. And you can see the materials. They're mostly Post-its, found ephemera, urine bottles. I didn't leave the studio a lot. And a taxi cab divider, which also is very similar to a police car divider. Most of the time, this is before Lyft, you could get a gypsy cab in Harlem because a lot of taxis just wouldn't go there. So you can see the set price on there, so it's like $5.99 or something, $5. So I thought it interesting that a lot of the drivers had master's degrees in engineering, but they couldn't get proper work in the US because of language and certification. And so they always had narratives to share. And some of those narratives I would write down on Post-its and place on this makeshift shrine. This is mostly how I mount a lot of my work. The column piece in the front is made from reclaimed lampshades that I purchased at a thrift shop. They're all made out of fabric, but they're all extremely aged. And I just mounted them with hot glue, one on top of each other. The backdrop, large cubes that you see, are referencing Andean flags. There's 4 flags, four cities called suyos. And those were made with paint chips from hardware stores. I would just go every time and just pick them up and glue them together with hot glue. This one you can read off, the house that Frank Lloyd Wright built for Fred Hampton and Mark Clarkey at Atahualpa. You can find the relationship between those probably by looking it up. It's basically a labyrinth, and all labyrinths are about transformation. Life is a labyrinth, it's about transformation. This project was done at a residency in Houston, the core program. It gave me time and space to develop my practice without thinking about limits and how much, basically how much space I would have to build something, a structure. So had I not opted to go that route, I would have had to have developed my practice based on what I could afford to rent. Because at the time I couldn't afford to purchase anything. So, well, that's another thing, real estate. Got into real estate later on, but we can talk about that later. This is Yawar Malku, Lando Landu. It's a to-scale sculpture piece in Spain, in Murcia, Spain. My work got more expansive as I kept developing my practice and doing residencies. And this is more referencing spiritual representations, cultural representations through pop culture. Star Wars, by George Lucas, where we were introduced to the Millennium Falcon. Of course, we find out that Millennium Falcon was not owned by Han Solo, but by Lando Calrissian. And in Star Wars, we find out that Han did not use the false floor. He had like an area underneath it. He said, "I never used this to smuggle people. He used it to smuggle products." But understanding that Lando was actually the owner of the Millennium Falcon, he was probably smuggling people. Where am I going with it? Lando is also an Afro-Peruvian dance. It's a spiritual dance that evolved from the Landu, from Angola. So I was making all these associations when the film came out. I must have been 10 or 11. I was making those associations because I saw Lando, Billy D. Williams, and I thought he was Peruvian. And so, because of his name, Landu. Later on, I came back to all of this. and decided to incorporate the ship, the Millennium Falcon, making it out of wood, to allude to Henry Box Brown, who shipped himself out of slavery into freedom through a wooden box. This is the bottom of the vessel. There's a lot of ephemera and other objects around it. Most of my installations rely on these small components to contextualize it. Otherwise, it's just a formal representation of the falcon. But I also did it for children. Children are usually excluded from going to museums. I wanted to also capture their imagination, because they can run underneath and adults can't, and they can usually stay under there. A lot of my work also references music. I grew up on music a lot. But I think for me it was like comic books. It was a coping tool. So I decided to create a monument to the vessels that I valued and incorporated as part of my life and soundtrack. So I decided to build this zigzag structure, alluding to also Andean architecture, but also Asian architecture and African architecture. These boom boxes, molded from my own Lasonic boombox from 1985. And so I made this piece. This was done in 2019 at the Havana Biennial in Cuba. I was not representing the US because the US is not invited. I have dual citizenship, so I was representing Peru. And I think I had another photograph. A lot of the young people started writing on it, which I thought was really, really wonderful. They were personalizing it. It became a collaboration. But I just wanted to share this and not necessarily go into that, other than just giving you the oral interpretation of it. So this was fixed for over a year, and then afterwards it was demolished except for one boombox, which was donated to the university in Havana. Going back to Tupac, Tupac Amaru, there's also Tupac Amaru Shakur. There's also the Tupac Amarus and the MRTA. This is alluding to third cinema as a concept. Third cinema films, alternative to mainstream Hollywood films, where they showed people of color in not a one-dimensional representation, but a three-dimensional representation. It's a scaffolding turned sideways, where you enter the space and it's about understanding otherness, also through disruption, because the first thing you hear is a foreign language. Most people in the States don't speak Quechua. Some people in the States don't understand Spanish. And very few people in the States understand English. But, which is to say that sometimes we speak to each other, but we're not listening or hearing each other. We're listening, but not really understanding what we're saying. Or we just have different interpretations of what we say to each other, or to ourselves sometimes. So there's two films playing at the same time. One is the visual and one is the audio. The audio is of Tupac Amaru, filmed in 1985 in Peru. It's a Cuban-Peruvian production by Reinaldo Arenas, not the Cuban poet, but the filmmaker from Peru. And the visuals are from Tupac Thug Angel from 2002 by Peter Spear. When you make your way around the piece, you'll see a projection of the documentary of Tupac, Amaru Shakur, but the audio is what you're hearing. So I wanted to blend them because I wanted to make sure that people understood there's certain commonalities there, historically, of resistance, of activism, but we're not necessarily privy to because we have a lot of mainstream media mislabeling or labeling and just misinforming us. All these I did at residencies in different versions, and they keep coming back to me. I reflect a lot on the work that I'm doing in order for me to get a different perspective of my work. Mentoring also took a huge role in my work, starting in around 2005 and 6. It definitely helps my practice. I had never taught or held a position as a faculty member at a university, mostly because I was doing residencies. But mentoring, I think, fills that void in a way. Andean tunics, hip-hop platforms, or I should say b-boy platforms, and even G's Bend quilts, all have these commonalities about strategies, encoding information, ritual. This is a large piece that I started doing. I've made various of these pieces, and they're all titled Rumi Maki, and then they have numbers. Rumi Maki meaning hand of stone in Quechua. It's one of the oldest Andean martial arts in the Americas, going back over 1,000 years. And so this is something I practiced as a child in Peru. Very similar to other martial arts like capoeira or kung fu. These also are made with paint chips that I got from hardware stores. They're done in small fragments and then put together. You can get an idea of the scale of this piece. This is more about 9 by 12 feet. This is actually based on Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 first album, the album cover. You could look it up and make your own interpretation of it.
What is the substrate that previous one was on? Was it cut to fit inside something architectural?
This?
Yeah.
What was it? What was the question?
The notch at the top was it cut to fit into like an architectural space?
No, it's 3 different sheets. Didn't have enough space. But it also suggests like there's this urgency to create something without necessarily tending too much for the perfection that is usually dictated by institutions of higher learning or museums. I also am influenced by Post-it bills that you see in schools right outside the hallway, or concert posters that are done, usually illegally, that are pasted on like that. This is the same approach. I also incorporated just different color tapes, packing tapes. And it's all paint chips with Elmer's wood glue. That's one of the scale. You can get an idea. This is a few months ago in the Moody Center at Rice University. I'm not interested in name dropping. The reason I mention it is because when I was at the core program in Houston, as a resident, you're given the option to teach if you want to at Rice University. So that's a really great option to have if you want to make a little extra money or you just want to have that on your resume. So I had a great conversation in connection with Rice University, with a lot of universities and different residencies. Also extend myself, volunteer to do studio visits to local universities or colleges or art centers whenever I do residencies in different places. This is just examples of performance work that I do. I don't do it for the public. It's always closed door. These photographs are all taken by Andre Leon Gray, who's actually all the way in the back. He's one of the residents at Atlantic Center for the Arts. The gentleman in purple. Yes. Putting him on the spot. Another performance piece. This is from McDowell Artist Center in New Hampshire. This is from a series of works that I did. You have the image of Poundmaker and Geronimo in the cover of the Black Panther newspaper from 1969. And some of the influences. Danza de Tijeras. If you look at Danza de Tijeras, Lindy Hop, and B-boy dancing, it's almost the same thing, but you can look it up. And then I'm just going to show you a couple of things, some graphic design. Stuff like that I do without putting my name out there. I usually just sign it Tupa. There are also different projects and organizations that I work with, activist organizations. And I just work pro bono and do this. I also curate. This is titled Eroica, an exhibit of superheroes of color in comic books, the history of. So I started in 1932, and I've been collecting this since since I was 11. Just always gravitated to similar representations of myself. And also curate a lot. Prism Art Fair in South Florida during the Art Basel Week. Again, another piece by Andre Leon Gray. And then Mashani Landfair, who's also at Atlantic Center for the Arts, which she is. Yes? By force. Yeah. My first curatorial project was in the dorms of the Art Institute of Chicago. Nobody wanted to talk to each other. I'm not the most socialized person. I don't like socializing. I don't like Homo sapiens. I like my space. I come out and go back in. I'm protractive. But I thought that it was essential. We're going to spend 12 months with each other. Not to force, but organically connect folks. Let us show each other our works. So I curated a show in the dorm space and asked everybody, just knocked on the doors, and everybody participated. It wasn't We Are the World and everybody shaking hands. It was just an introduction without an introduction. It was a surrogate representation of ourselves, and it was okay. And we didn't have, kumbaya or dinner together. It wasn't like that at all. But in time, we started putting the faces to the paintings or the sculptures or the photos or the performances, and it was okay. It was organic. Got it? Later on, I just started curating because I just didn't see enough projects out there that included up-and-coming students, artists, what have you. A lot of times artists don't get included because of age. A lot of times it's for gender. A lot of times it's for race, ethnicity, even cities, Somebody in the boroughs doesn't want to include somebody in this borough. Somebody in the 3rd ward doesn't want to include somebody in the 5th ward. There's so many reasons why. And just politics. Somebody just doesn't like me. That's okay. I'll just do it myself. And having to do that, scratching my way through, just refined the machete. And so I was able to produce a lot, generate a lot for other folks. And it wasn't about me, but it was also about me. Which is to say that it gave me the opportunity to step outside of myself and focus on other people. How can I make their practice look, up here, level 10? Not to create a hierarchy, but set standards higher for ourselves. And it sharpened my writing skills, which I gained by reading magic realist books and science fictions. I was a little shorty. But my sister helped because she used to tell me bedtime stories all the time. Just make them up. That's a great way to learn and get exercise. but also co-curate. Marie Vickles is a curator at Perez Art Museum and Little Haiti Cultural Center in Miami, and she's going to be at the Atlantic Center for the Arts on Tuesday and Wednesday. And so I collaborate with Marie on different projects, with different folks too. We collaborated on this one, Vernacular Spectacular. Some of the folks in here are here. Yanira Collado, Dominican artist. Yanira, where are you? She doesn't want to raise her hand. Anyway, and we also design our invites. I tend to try and control, kind of like Prince, control every aspect of my presentation. The work does not end in the studio. It keeps going. The language has to be shaped by myself. My headshots, always black and white, kind of diffuses the form and color. Yeah, because you don't want a picture of yourself in color and then your work really colorful right next to it. Kind of collapses on itself. So you want to create a contrast. So I do black and white. You can't go wrong. Or maybe you can. Curatorial project from last summer. Sofia Cordova. Where's my sister? Yeah, she's hiding back. Oh, she is. She's not my sister. From another mother. Sofia Cordova. Puerto Rican artist. Installation artist. Oh, some of the artists that are in this show are here too. Nathaniel Dene is also in the residency. Onegide Shabaka. I'm putting them all on the spot on purpose. This is what we do when we love our friends and fellow practitioners. We support each other. Another project I created is because there's a shortage of housing, there's a shortage of jobs, there's a shortage of a lot of things. And so I purchased this Rialta Volkswagen mobile home, and I use it as a studio. And I give it to artists for 1 or 2 months so they can use it and do whatever they want in there. They can be musicians, poets, writers, visual artists, at no fee. Just park it outside their home or their apartment. The one thing I do not do is give them the keys to drive, because that's a liability. Graphic design tools have also influenced me to do different types of sculptures. These are books by George Jackson, Soledad Brother, and Prison Poems by Miguel Hernandez. Other projects with a collective that I work with called the Base Collective. We use graphic design tools similar to what Yoko Ono was doing in the late 60s to state war is over really large, and then in tiny text, if you want it. The Base Collective addressed a lot of social political issues that are occurring at the time between 2005 and today. We're still doing this. This is in Chicago. It's all self-sponsored. This is a more recent work at Temple University in 2021. The Young Lords, temporal spatial investigations of presence. It's an audio piece, a sculptural piece, historical piece, relating the Young Lords Party, predominantly Puerto Rican organization, activist organization in the New York City, but also in other cities. It started in Chicago. And I made a vinyl recording of the office where they were based in Philadelphia, and of the Black Panther Party office also. And there are field recordings. So I walked the area, the perimeter of where the buildings once stood, in hopes that in the future I could actually interpret this through a machine that doesn't exist anymore, or yet, I should say, and do a 3D build structure based on the sound recordings, because you can actually, we're almost there in being able to do that. I wanted to create a way of representing both parties, both organizations that did not exploit their presence. I find that a lot in popular culture, that especially the Black Panther Party or other activist organizations, where they're, the black berets, the leather, they tend to be constantly exploited or taken out of context. I wanted to represent this. I've been working with a lot of the elders since 2004 from these organizations. And so I wanted to address the spaces where they were housed once and create like a repository, but it's somewhat abstract. So that's why I created this booth for you to listen to. But what you're also hearing is the economy of the sound of that community, the cars that pass by, the people that walk by, the different languages that might be speaking. Kind of very, very subtle things, whereas most people think you're going to hear music, things like that. There's a poster component to it that I designed. The posters are based off information and text, articles from the community where those offices were housed. And finally, the AIM Biennial, which Marie Vickles, Jean Moreno, another curator who's going to be here at Institute of Contemporary Art, Atlantic Center for the Art, from the ICA in Miami, doing studio visits. And Amy Rosenblum Martin, a curator from New York, works with the Guggenheim and Bronx Museum. We put ourselves together and created this statewide biennial, drawing from a lot of artists who are not well represented, who lack resources or access to resources or networking, and highlighted them by asking all of them to create site-specific installations, which are not necessarily permanent. Some are writers, some musicians, poets, choreographers, dancers. Any type of creative practitioner that wanted to participate was invited. And then we created a hard copy catalog and gave it away for free throughout Florida. Everything is just self-sponsored. And the catalogs were in color and placed in different institutions, usually independent bookstores, nonprofits, universities. Some museums carried it also. And we did this in 2020, and we did this past December, and it usually runs a month. But some of the work stays out there, and you might be able to see it online through a search engine satellite, or if you drive by, because all the addresses are written on the catalog, or through QR codes, because some pieces are audio or video. And there's a website, just look it up, AIM Biennial. There's an AIM Biennial in New York, but that's not it. Just put Florida. And we also invited Miccosukee Seminole reservations to participate, and they did. Yeah, and that's it. So, thank you. You want this? Oh. Yes?
With so many young student artists in the room, is there any material that interests you that you haven't gotten around to but you think is right for exploring the curatorial or research vein? Anything popping up new today?
No, because I do a lot of studio visits in schools. Most students are usually using things that they learned in undergrad. Most of my visits are not with undergrads, they're usually with grad students. So they're usually using that. There's a couple of exceptions. Some students are using sound. It's not revolutionary, but I think it's for economic reasons why they gravitate towards sound. But I use vinyl a lot. They're not thinking about that. They're just thinking about using sound in a sculptural form, which is how I think of it. How to disrupt and alter spaces. Those are conversations I'm having more so with students, rather than matter. Yeah. But it also depends where I go. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how else to elaborate on that one. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
So you spent a lot of time going to different residencies, and you said you used that to both cultivate your artistic practice and avoid having a full-time job.
Right.
While using those to cultivate your artistic practice, did you find that there were limitations that you encountered at certain residencies that you had to work around regarding like materials that you wanted to use, or did you always kind of find a way to be accommodated for what you wanted to do at these residencies?
Never for materials, mostly for housing. Yeah, and that started in grad school. I created a small IKEA-looking sofa, but it had a false entrance in the back, and I could sleep in it and house all my black beans and rice. And I lived in it for 2 years without them ever finding out. The maintenance people knew, but they were looking out for me. But I saved about $15,000. But as far as residencies are concerned, materials, no. I just adapted. I usually work with, I go from one residency to the other without anything, really. Most of the work that you saw was collapsible. I donate all the 2x4s, all that wood you saw. It's all donated to local nonprofits who might need it, or to artisans or artists who might need it. I don't take it with me. It's just better to pass it on. Otherwise, no, there's no, yeah. If a hardware store doesn't have paint chips, I'll go find a magazine to cut. I'll use spray paint, and yeah, it's very fluid of a practice for me. It's also a challenge, but like I said, I like to sharpen my machete, make sure that it's, able to cut through. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that some of your inspiration started from when you were a child, that you were inspired by art to do with realism and comic books and graffiti. Would you say that you had any other significant sources of inspiration?
I mentioned slightly my sister. My mom's a storyteller. She passed that on to my siblings, but just because you pass it on doesn't mean you practice it or they practice it. My sister Stella would always put us to bed with these made-up stories, because she would read a lot, and she would just make them up because she knew that we were going to remember the story from the night before, so she would have to constantly make up. So it's a matter of improvising constantly, and that really made it just a rich experience as a child. Sometimes we take that for granted, but I'm very introverted in general. I can do this here now, but when I leave, I'm going to fall apart because it takes everything out of me. It's not rehearsed. Which is to say that I'm very sensitive to things, to everything. And so a drop of water to me, I can drown in. And it also makes me very prolific because emotionally everything gets to me. So I usually have to shut down and have this, veneer. And so I have to withdraw a lot in order to process and purge all of that, and process it, and just, so I'm always working. I didn't need much. Those short stories really pushed me. From my mom, from my sister, my mother buying encyclopedias, the first thing she purchased when we got to the United States. And I would lock myself in the closet. I lived in the closet for the first 4 years of my life in the US with a little flashlight and just reading, devouring the encyclopedias, all the books, just reading it over and over and over like a mantra. Maybe it was because of anxiety also. Too much violence outside. Children just inadvertently know how to cope. Unfortunately, when we get older, we use other things to cope with that are not healthy. I had safe enough examples to choose a more healthy route. So, but I would say those, my mother, my sister, the encyclopedias. In high school, I was actually writing essays for other students for $5,
So
Yes.
So maybe this piggybacks off that a little bit, but just to expand further, like, how do you, I guess I'm just being, on a base level, like, curious about how you, kind of like approach your engagement with, like, weaving together all of these different histories and stories, like, both, through all these different kinds of, like how you are kind of, evoking those maybe through certain kind of, like, media choices or certain forms, or like literally like engaging certain kinds of archives or inserting certain kinds of histories into public spaces. Like it seems like, I mean, there's that kind of like that kind of storytelling maybe, or like engagement with history that kind of like runs throughout
Sure.
practices. I guess maybe
Yeah.
maybe it continues on from like being encyclopedias thinking about stories.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All of those things and then some that I've forgotten have influenced the practice. Things we take for granted, that we don't think about unless we start reflecting constantly. After every certain amount of time to reflect on what one did, rather than disposing of it and think, oh, that was bad work. I'm more interested in sharing that bad work with the public and having a discussion, a critical discussion about it. Why did it work? Why didn't it work? I think about Robert Rauschenberg and Jean-Michel Basquiat. Their work was very layered. It was like maps. For me, it's easy to enter it and digest it. What shaped my worldview in Peru coming up was this, something that doesn't exist anymore in there, which is this broad diversity of culture, ethnicity, race, language that happened during a small period of time in the 1970s during a dictatorship, which was very beneficial culturally. But we left, and so that left with me, and that shaped and everything that I look at, everything I see, how I see everything. But visually, I guess as far as like art, I usually bring up Rauschenberg and Basquiat because the complexity, because of the intersections that they created in their works that are so clear, but yet also sometimes it's like looking at a stone from above water. You look at it enough times, it becomes very clear. But it's just a matter of exercising. Just negotiating with time. But in short, it's my experience growing up in Peru that shaped it. The family, the first photograph you saw, the diversity in the family, culturally rich practitioners. We had writers, singers, musicians. No performance artists, but you could say they're all performing for the camera. So, yeah. Yes.
Did you ever have to deal with the challenges of censorship from academic institutions or any museums or like residencies, considering like touches on those, like any pushback from anything that was like seemed too intense for like the white American gaze?
Sure, all the time. From
How would you deal with that?
they're all unique. Different ways of negotiating space, place. I think in junior college, Miami-Dade Community College, I did a piece based on a song. It was like a punk rock song, somewhat, I would say, by Nine Inch Nails, March of the Pigs. And I put pigs on a large piece of plywood. It was wet, so I left it on Friday, come back on Monday. What I didn't know is that the police academy across the street was graduating, and they were having their ceremony at the theater, which is right outside the art department. So I come back on Monday, and there's notes and left for me. I was immediately suspended. No question asked, nothing. That may not have racial, but it may, depending on who does the artwork. The work was taken down, and they wanted to destroy it, all this stuff. I just sat down with the chair and explained to them what my motives were. It was an accident. Today I probably would have done it on purpose. Back then I didn't do it on purpose. I have no love, for that kind of government-sponsored repression, or oppression, I should say. That was 1994. Yeah, 94. Later on in undergrad, well, I'll skip to that, but I think Renee asked me about Yale, or I should say Yale. I was constantly stopped by the campus police, going from one building to the other. Always asking, why did I get stopped? Because you don't look like a student. So what is a student supposed to look like? So there you go. Didn't matter whether I had my ID. Didn't matter whether I had a big old Yale sweater. None of that. No. It's just look. Black and brown figures were the enemy. Because also the security guards were the actual New Haven police. So there's no way to win that one. And it's a struggle that just keeps going on. You look every year for the last 30 years or more, those issues are constant at that school. But not that school only, it's everywhere. That happens to any person of color at that school. So not necessarily because I'm an artist. Censored, I've been censored in exhibits, sure. My work is fairly subtle. It's abstract mostly, yeah. But there are sometimes certain titles will be censored. Yeah.
Where do you draw the line? Like, what are you like, okay, I'm just going to pull out?
What was the last thing you said?
When do you draw the line? When are you like, I'm just going to pull out? I can't respect the nature of the art or the title?
I don't. The more you experience things, the more you're prepared. You can see, just like capitalism, capitalism is a system. So you know that every 10 years there's going to be a recession. So you save up. You don't go buying. You wait until that recession's over. So you see it coming. It's not always exact, but you see it coming. So you have to be on your guard. I think that's why the Young Lords, the history of Young Lords, the history of Black Panther Party, for me was like a template that I needed something to cope with. The comic books were not enough. Music is not enough. I needed something that's a little more in-depth and thought-provoking and challenging, and also relate to my own politics as they evolved. Those are not the only, but I needed a lot more if I was going to subsist in this environment. Not only the art environment, but talk about this part of the continent. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that I just internalized because I just could not navigate without internalizing it. Yeah. It becomes part of the raw material that gets shaped into the work. Yeah. So thank you. Yes.
With so many students in the room, any advice on how to win residencies?
I'm not big on winning. Can't learn anything you don't lose. Once in a while. What is that poet Tom Petty once said? Even the losers get lucky sometimes. No, I don't believe in luck, but.
Follow up to that, when you're in your sort of decade-long residency stream,
But I will get back to you.
well, it's related.
Yes.
Did you find yourself lucky in that you applied for and received residencies, or were you applying for like 50 residencies?
No, neither one. I was applying to a lot of residencies, but not 50. It's like applying for a job. Any job that anybody has held here. You apply for a job, or 4 jobs, right? You don't apply just one job. If you apply for one job, that means you don't really want to work. Unless your cousin's sister works there and is guaranteed you that position. Otherwise, you're applying for 4 jobs. And what else do you do? You dress a certain way that they want you to dress. You put on a monkey suit, you go in there, and you say exactly what they want to hear, and they hire you. And after that, it's, sky's the limit. But applying for residencies or even grad schools, for me, was that. I prepared a lot of students to apply for grad schools that they wanted to get into, and they got into them. But they have to have the passion, and they have to have the work in there. They have to do the work. It isn't just a matter of makeup. I was very fortunate, I would say, to get into the art schools that I applied to. I didn't get into all of them. I didn't get into Hunter College. They didn't want to have nothing to do with me. And that's okay. Maybe I wasn't right for their program. As far as residencies, a lot of time when we go on tour, on vacation with our families, or you take a weekend vacation somewhere, you find out where you're going to go, right? You find out where are the hot spots you want to go to, go dance here, go eat there. But we tend not to do that for grad school. We tend not to do that for residencies. We just apply and that's it. No, it's not that simple. You have to do the work. You have to find out who is in that residency, who was there before you. Does that work speak a certain way that has a certain consistency? Who's going to be in the jury? Shape it to that. It's just like finding out who's going to interview me. Go find out about that person or those people. Where is it located? What city? Find out the history of that residency, the city, the town. All of this. This is all integral. You only benefit from it. It's just like a lawyer going into court. They already know the questions and answers because they're doing their homework. But you have to really be invested in what you're going to do, no matter what you do. Even if you're trying to meet somebody, you try to find out what they like to eat, what they don't like to eat, what they like to read. For anything, you have to invest in it. And so I dove into passionately, but also obsess over my practice. To me, there was nothing else other than that. That and family, and that's it. Or I should say my mom. An opinion to share about residencies is that you look carefully where you want to be, why you want to be there. I said earlier about there's certain ones that are for about retreating, like Skowhegan School of Art in Maine. 9 weeks during the summer, they take about 30 plus students or artists. That transformed my practice when I was in grad school, between the first year and the second year. Why? Because I had downtime alone. I was in a cabin, kind of like Thoreau, completely isolated. But he was just down the street from the local town anyway. But I was really isolated. And I had time to read and stop doing my work, because at the time my work, even when I got into grad school, it looked like commercial gallery art. It was compact. And I needed to get that out of my system. But I didn't know how, and I actually didn't know I was actually doing that. While I was in residence there, I had peer-to-peer conversations. I slowly transitioned out of that and allowed my practice to be a lot more fluid, more open. Not about commercial galleries, but about self-development and visual development. So that did that for me. Something more networking was at Art O'My in the Hudson River, and Studio Museum in Harlem, the core program in Houston, which is 2 years. So second year is optional. And those are great programs. They provide medical insurance, a studio, a huge stipend. The Radcliffe at Harvard University, $65,000 a year. You're not obligated to do anything but your work. And you get a huge studio. Museums, universities look at these places. They pay attention. You also have conversations with other scholars there, other fellows who are usually historians, critics, other visual practitioners. So your experience can be very, very rich, as well as isolated. And there's a ton of residencies out there too. to try out. You don't have to marry yourself to 20 years like I did. You try one. Yeah. But don't ever do a residency you have to pay top dollar for, like, you know, $400 for a week or $10,000 for a year. No. They either pay you or you just apply $20 fee or $75 fee. It's pretty high though, but yeah. Yes.
Have you ever found yourself in a position where you have to justify the reasons why you choose to work with a certain material or in a certain way that may not resemble your previous work? As far as continuity, as far as it's not congruent, it looks dislocated, it doesn't look like a William Cordova. You know, I wonder, is this an important thing for us as artists to have in mind, to have an aesthetic continuity, or do we have that allowance of, heck, I'm going to do this because this feels right and because it works with my subject and because this is where I am right now, not where I was last year or 2 years ago? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because there's a ton of things in mind, but it doesn't always come out because I'm usually gravitating here or here. When I was an undergrad at maybe the community college, I thought I had to pick this, or this. I was categorizing myself. I realized that at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, that they had so many things to draw from. So I started practicing everything. And that was okay. I just let go of that other mentality. Or maybe I evolved from that to do audio, do performance, do film, do video, or different types of printing. I still can't paint. I tried it. Did a lot of drawing, just almost everything you can think of, okay? Even public performance. I don't like spectacle, but I tried it. When I started doing residencies, my practice in grad school was interdisciplinary. It was installation-based. So they took me as I am. While I was in residencies, I sometimes did group shows. My introduction into the art worlds, because there's many, they overlap, was with all of this. They had to take me with all my stuff. And so, because they did that, they expect almost anything and everything that I propose. The difference between that and somebody who comes straight out of school and gets branded by a commercial gallery in a major city is that they're not going to be able to veer from what they're doing with that commercial gallery, because that commercial gallery has now branded them, and that's all they're known for. Because it's easier to sell a packaged product than it is to sell my garage, my garage sale. And so because of that, sky's the limit. Yeah. Now, it doesn't mean that the commercial galleries are always going to let me do what I want. And that gets more complicated. But I'm not going to talk about commercial galleries here. So, yeah.
You say you find yourself inspired by music. Do you find yourself more like, what music artists, music artists do you find yourself like inspired by? Or is it more like contemporary artists or more artists from like your childhood?
Some of both. Yeah, some of both. I'm pretty picky, but I also like tacky music, yeah. I can't say I listen to Tupac and Prince, yeah. But I also like the Monkees, We all like cheese, right? Sure. Yeah. Oh, I can't hear you.
How would you find the reception of your work when you were back in Miami versus how you moved out of South Florida? And one other question. I know you said you've been working a lot with Miami artists, specifically in Plaza. What kind of patterns of art have you seen out of Miami's artists specifically?
Well, because there are some here, I can't speak bad about them. But I will be critical about them. These are the exceptions, South Florida artists, some of them. Of course, I'm biased because I invited them. I kind of snuck out of Miami to do grad school. Snuck out because I wasn't established or anything. Miami's, small. This is before, or actually during the infancy stage of Art Basel South Beach. Art Basel was canceled in 2001 because of September 11. I left in 2002. Between 02 and 04, I was in grad school. I never came back to South Florida, except for the holidays to visit my mom. So my perception of South Florida art community was not fully formed until I moved back and I finished the first chapter of my art practice, which was residencies between 04 and 2014. And I saw how much it changed. It used to be artist, nonprofit, do-it-yourself, home kit art community. When I came back, it was a lot more uninformed savviness, commercial galleries. But they don't really sell art in South Florida. Sell football tickets, basketball tickets. It's a lot of big money in law and medical field, but there's not that much investment in the visual arts. But there's a lot of galleries there because it was fairly cheap, but that's changed. So a lot of the galleries are closing up. If you look up the history of Soho, the art world in Soho, the art world in East Village, circa 1981, 1990, you'll see the changes for economic reasons, real estate. It's another topic I got into about real estate, but we won't have time for that here. When I came back, I had been in the art, the Whitney Biennial, which they have every 2 years. And so the community saw me differently, but I didn't see myself differently. For me, it was just a pit stop to a ton of other projects that I was doing. I didn't fight to arrive at that point. The only thing I fought for is just to have the time and space to create my practice, whether it was in Miami or not. The one thing I don't do is I don't exhibit in South Florida. I curate in South Florida. I work with a space called Under the Bridge Art Space. It's an experimental space for any practitioner who wants to propose a project, no matter their age, gender, or social political leaning. Artists in South Florida, there's many camps, complacent camps. There's people who are in the trenches, and there's people who are just not present, But it's like family. We all have families, and there's members in there who, you don't want your Uncle Pepe coming by because you don't want to hear all that drama. But we love him anyway, But doesn't mean that we can't be critical about them. But also try to lend a hand, try to support, try to create a different perspective. Do something healthy to change some of that landscape. It's tough, but it's not over. Are we over? Yes. Thank you.